Any comments? So chapter 4 is the chapter on methodology. On what methods we used. Here go a picture of us at the Center for New Leadership when we was prepping for our album release party. We just finished having a whole concert, prepping songs, giving each other feedback. You see our ancestor movement, cosmology, mural that we collectively created in the background. Shout out to Priya, who helped put that together and laid the artwork down for us. But this chapter is about methodology and epistemology. So we start this off by talking about liberation psychology as like the epistemological soundtrack. And earlier, if you wasn't here, we talked about epistemology just being about how you create knowledge, how you understand knowledge is created. Like what knowledge you stand on. Like, yo, that knowledge is, I'm gonna fuck with that knowledge, I ain't gonna fuck with that knowledge. Why you do that? That's epistemology. You know what I'm saying? Like, so epistemology is how you create knowledge, how you understand knowledge, how you make knowledge, how you go to knowledge. So me being a social psychologist and being in the field of social psychology, liberation psychology, which comes out of that, and Martine Bottle, who was a social psychologist and the father of liberation psychology, I really want to ground this in this dissertation in psychology, but that felt like the best vehicle in psychology to ground it in for me. And like I said earlier, liberation psychology relates to, like, at the basic level, like, how are you, like, liberating yourself? Like, don't do no research and build a theory talking about you trying to save somebody else or you trying to figure out somebody else's liberation. Like, one of the central questions is, like, how you trying to liberate yourself and how you engage in something, going back to activist Parr and Brennan Likes in the work in Guatemala when they was journeying with women going through trauma from war, particularly, I think, Civil War, and being there for years, journeying with them, you know, journeying with that trauma, healing with them, hearing those stories, holding those stories, sharing her own stories, or understanding why she, like, how are you in the research process for your own stuff, to get your own stories out. Like, don't just be trying to, like, interview somebody else about internalizing white supremacy and sexism. What about you? How your research is internalizing it, you know? And then also, liberation psychology is also rooted in, like, liberation theology. So scholarship of theology of, like, the Bible being seen from the people that's the oppressed. Once again, pedagogy of oppressed is kind of like the foundation. All these kind of like centrals and South American ideas in the 80s and the 90s, 70s, 80s, and 90s of scholars, people doing community work and dialogue with people called peasants, or people in the bottom structure of that society, and people doing dialectical conversations and organizing, and really developing, like, ideas that like religion or liberation theology should be seen from the people who are at the bottom, but also liberation psychology comes out of that tradition. And it's really talking about how do you liberate psychology, aka the methods are racist, unsexist, not by the people, not for the people. The theories, racist, sexist, not by the people, not for the people. Some of the deadlines for the academy and for the curriculum and the syllabi, not by the, so like not just think about your topic, like, oh, you're doing prison abolition, you're doing, like, work on solitary confinement, or my topic is studying race, but, like, how you liberating psychology? How is your praxis of research and showing up, liberating yourself, but also liberating psychology from the ideas, the theories, the methods, the practice, the way you show up as a psychologist? So that's what liberation psychology is. And like I was telling you earlier, when I came into the program, it was a political project for me. It was a political process. I wasn't just going there to be a student. It was a political project that I was going there, and all of the historical and political realities and all of the journeys as a formerly incarcerated person going to the school, and already connected to H.O.L.L.A and Eddie and the Bedford Hills and so many other people even before I went to the PhD program. So in honoring their wisdom and those stories way more than I honor what I could get from the academy, and committed to like adding on to the stories that gave me hope. So those things were really important for me and helped me land on liberation psychology, which drove me to the ideas of Martine Bardo, who was like the father of liberation psychology, and really the foundation elements of like, how do you develop a psychology from the aspect of the people? How are you trying to liberate yourself? How are you developing methods in practice, in journey with community over time? And how are you trying to uplift through this practice like dialogue that tells the community, the real story about some of the lies that we don't hear from being in generational poverty, from being in structural, institutional. Like, you don't hear that the system is failing. Sometimes you think it's yourself. Sometimes you think it's your people. Sometimes you just think it's the Negro problem. Like how W.E.B. Du Bois was able to flip the Negro problem on his head and really show like it was a social, historical, cultural problem. And it wasn't that like black people who came out of slavery were just dehumanized, were just criminal all the time. It was like you had like sharecropping, and you had Jim Crow, and you had convict leasing, and you had the vacancy laws, and you had people get out of prison / slavery with a new language and a new institution and country structure, and they didn't get no land, they didn't get no education, they didn't get college degrees, and then you punish them for being enslaved for 500 years and not fitting into a system that you built that wasn't designed for them, and caught them the problem, the Negro problem. And W.E.B. Du Bois worked on the Philadelphia Negro. I got that book too somewhere. The Philadelphia Negro is really important in methodology, and for our this work had a lot of critical ethnography in it, but that spirit and that energy of W.E.B. Du Bois of flipping that Negro problem on his head is something that we embody. Something that I learned from the Public Science Project and my training at the Graduate Center under Michelle, Maria, Brett, and all of those people about participatory action research, but also the foundations of research that's trying to tell a different story, a structural and historical, methodological different story. That's not just about the outcomes that are produced if you only research stuff at a certain individual level and you don't get the social level and the historical level. So shout out to my ancestor, W.B.E. Du Bois, for giving us that work. Let's get into some of the actual methods, man. Like I said, critical ethnography, really thinking critical about taking notes, about race, class, gender, dynamics, culture, wording. What does wording mean? What does that mean? What does dynamics mean? So me being one of the co-founders of H.O.L.L.A, the main facilitator of H.O.L.L A, the dissertation person at H.O.L.L A, throughout our whole practice, all of us was taking notes, writing chart paper, but I also was one of those people taking notes, and more specifically for the dissertation. So, but really bringing in that, our culture, like when we was talking in circles on a bus trip, debriefing an event, in a healing circle, in our political education session. Not only if I'm one of the main curators of the space, I'm also a young person that came from that history, and I'm also in a space, so I got the vibration of what we're saying. I know what the culture means. So critical ethnography means really trying to bring some of those intersectional frameworks that we understand about who we are as people, and who we are as telling our stories and what's important to document, and then really implying that knowledge to documenting what you see, from note taking to doing interviews, following up questions, asking people what does that mean, from taking pictures of different spaces, different places we go, taking pictures of different chart papers, reading through the social media responses of people responding to our work. So critical ethnography over the last 5 years, all of us in H.O.L.L A played that role, and having that intersectional analysis and being and adding that praxis that we want to document certain elements of our work, which was mostly all of our work, not only in writing and notes, but picture, and also in debriefs. We debriefed a lot of stuff. That was also part of our critical ethnography. Another critical method in this process was participatory action research. We developed a lot of healing circles and a curriculum for healing circles, where we want to heal with other young people impacted by the 7 neighborhood phenomena, where 75% of the New York State prison population is coming from 7 neighborhoods in New York City. So we really want to heal with young people from those communities, young people who's already engaged in community organizing throughout New York City, and the young people who's already building relationships with in community-based organizations. And then we identified some like non-organizations or agencies, just like sites in communities that we know where young people are at. And we reached out to them to have circles and to see if they want to share their stories with us about healing, about organizing. And what does organizing and healing mean for young people? And what does it mean to talk about that with each other as a form of building a relationship and healing with each other? So our PAR work really was H.O.L.L.A, and I'm gonna go more into who is H.O.L.L.A, but in the next bullet point. But the PAR work was our team, which consisted of about 10 of us, going through a lot of the 18-month process and going through that study and that training and that radical healing process, and that involves a lot of rituals and trainings, but particularly like a PAR training with some of the experts in the field, and a lot of study on survey development, and what is a survey, what levels we want to ask questions in a survey, a lot of practice on making surveys and bringing surveys back, and why we want to use a survey, or why we want to use a focus group, or why we want to use an interview. So we had a lot of conversations about how we want to design our research, and then we realized that we wanted our research to be about healing while we learn healing, and that also pulls from the notion of activist PAR, that research should have action throughout the process. So we felt like healing while learning about healing is like another way of having action throughout the process. So each circle was a form of healing. We was actually healing with young people and crying and learning stuff and sharing stuff we never shared before. But we also was collecting surveys and assessments so that we could do analysis and study on. And we end up over 5 years or so doing about 80 circles. A lot of them in New York, but all over the country: Jersey, Oakland, Minnesota, Detroit, DC, Maryland, some even in Columbia, Medellin. So we've just been doing circles all over, learning from community. A lot of the circles, some circles in prisons, some circles in jails, some circles with young people, in all of the intersections, just a group of young people, some queer, some straight, some women, some young men, some circles with the intersectional communities together. Some circles with like communities from young people from my neighborhood, and you got other like system stakeholders, and we having a circle about healing. Some circles only with sisters, some circles only with brothers. So even all of our 80 circles, while they had a focus of community healing, there's a lot of intersections thinking about what we learned from our Black feminist understandings and standpoints on violence and on healing, but also thinking about our indigenous standpoint. So we was developing a praxis to heal with the intersections that make up who we are and who we thought was important. So young people and all of those intersections in community were important. So those are the two major methodological tools for data collection in the dissertation. And under critical ethnography, I did individual interviews with also the young people in H.O.L.L.A, who was part of my PAR team. So another part of the critical ethnography is like the individual interviews I did like on the PAR team, on the H.O.L.L.A participants, on Ashley, on Alex, on Rakim, at different time points over the 18 months. So after they finished the 6-month process, we did reflections and interviews and focus groups on like what stood out, what was good, what could be better. But also throughout the first 6 months of the 18-month process, like on different themes and topics within the week, we have circles and evaluations and surveys to see what people are understanding and to have feedback on that. And then when we was making our documentary, we also had longer, in-depth interviews and analysis where we all shared our analysis on what healing justice is, who are we, and why we do healing justice. So also analyzed those individual interviews and made transcripts and made codes out of those. And then at the end of the 18-month process, I interviewed all 9 of the young people about their experiences in the 6-month process, the Nat Turner program, about their experience in the 12-month process, the Youth Organizing Collective, and about their experiences in the healing justice movement, like the community work. So all of the work in the 18-month process that was mostly on the internal level and collective level of study and stuff, but also their reflections on the community movement work that they was doing the last 12 months as well in the healing justice movement. And I asked questions about development, about healing, about relationships, about spirit, and about hope. So in all 3 of those sections, I asked them questions about, what development happened, what challenges happen, what developmental challenges happen, what development growths happen for you and for others. What relationships grew, stagnated, what you learned about relationships and yourself, other people, just relationships. What you learned about healing. What did you see healing? What did you learn about healing? What more healing could happen? And then how did you understand, how did we talk about how this spirit and hope showed up? So the interview at the 18-month process is talking about all of those themes and all of those questions, but I asked those themes and questions in the 6-month process. Then I asked those themes and questions in the 12-month process, so I get their feedback on the first 6 months, I get their feedback on the second 12 months, and then I get their feedback with us engaging and building a movement and community around those same questions. So that's kind of like the methodology for the dissertation, critical ethnography and participatory action research. And it's kind of me doing some interviews and research on our PAR team, YOC, and our PAR team doing research and organizing in the community. So it's kind of like a story about H.O.L.L.A, our legacy, and what we learning inside, and how is that translating to like our community organizing work. And hope and spirit is like a throughway through that process. And just to give you some more context, the 18-month process that this research was context in, it's called the Nat Turner Revolutionary Leadership Training and the Youth Organizing Collective Training. They got stipends to be a part of those programs, $300 per month in the 6-month training, Nat Turner, and then they got $1,000 per month in the 12-month training. The young people were between the ages of 18 and 27. The average age was like 21 years old. Most of them self-identified as black, 88%. We had people that was mixed. We had one white person in the group. We only had 2 sisters in the first part of the group. And then we end up having 4 sisters all together. We only had one person that was sexually identified as queer or not heterosexual out of the 9. Most of them was from Brooklyn. We had one youth from the Bronx. Some was from Jersey. Another young person just came here not too long ago from Missouri. Shout out to Lauren. Each young person got like another additional stipend for being a part of the research, like $300 or so for just being a part of research outside of the program stipend. So that's some information on the participants. All of them was from the 7 neighborhoods or living in the 7 neighborhoods now, or have a direct understanding relationship to the 7 neighborhoods, even being incarcerated, family member being incarcerated, parent, etc. That was really important. And the ways that we collected data, like I said, in that PAR work, we developed surveys and assessments so that we could learn from the community that we was having circles with. So we collected data through the surveys and the evaluations and healing circles. We also, in our participatory action research, did a lot of large community events. And we made murals where we asked people to share their art and their wisdom. And we called it like mapping or youth voice or community voice. So there's a lot of murals that we made throughout the 5 years that we carry with us at certain large community events, so that community can share on top of community. So that was another way that we collected data. Like I told you, we interviewed young people in H.O.L.L.A at different time points, and we saved those surveys and did an analysis on those surveys. We transcribed the interviews and did analysis on those interviews. And we did a lot of collective data analysis, like breaking up into teams, breaking up into groups, on the participatory work, and uploading everything to Google Docs and Google Form, and making chart spreadsheets on Google Form. And then for each question on the survey, we'll add each response under the question in a chart box on a Google spreadsheet. And then once we get all of the responses inputted in that spreadsheet, which took work, we made 4 copies of that spreadsheet and broke our whole team of 9 or 10 up into 4 groups. So each group had a whole copy of all of the spreadsheet with all of the individual responses to the survey and evaluation. We cut those up, and from each question, we looked at the responses and made codes in our small group. In our small group, negotiated how we wanted to group up responses, while we grouped them up that way. And we did that throughout the survey and throughout the evaluation. And then after we, in our small groups, made these codes, we all came back together as a team, each of the 4 groups that broke up. And every group had a chance to present on how they put responses together for each question in the survey and evaluation, and why they did it that way, and why they coded it the way they coded it. And then after they present that, the other 3 groups get to ask them questions if they had any, could take notes, could agree with them, or could say that, I did it a different way. And we use that method to work on coding. And a lot of times we all was coding a lot of the same responses the same ways. In certain moments we had to ask each other questions and get clarity and then code it that way. Sometimes we double coded it because when we talked with each other, we understood that it was multiple ways that we can code something. But that process was iterative throughout the whole process, until we got a coding book and a coding flow for an agreement for how we understood the categories that we was theming. And then so that's how we did analysis on the survey and evaluation. I was the one that mostly did analysis on the interviews from the Healing Justice video, and a lot of that was listening to the interviews and doing grounding theory analysis, like hearing the interviews, taking notes from each interview, saying like, oh, Mashley saying this about family. Oh shoot, I also hear Mashley saying this about identity. So I just started taking notes. Oh shoot, Cory's talking about family too. Oh shoot, Alex saying family too. So as I started listening to all of the interviews on repeat back and forth and just taking notes about what themes I'm hearing in all of the interviews. And then I started comparing those notes or memos across interviews. Like, oh, family is in all of them. Oh, they talking about identity in all of them. Oh, people are talking about healing justice like this in all of them. So from that grounded theory approach of memoing certain themes that I heard in each interview, I start to see if I see one theme in 1 or 2 interviews, is it in like 4 or 5 of them? Is it 6 of them? You know, to determine if that's a real theme that's going across multiple interviews. So from this kind of like listening, making notes, comparing notes from one theme to another theme to see if it was an ongoing process till I started to get like a scheme of like what themes felt like was in most of the interviews and what codes I could use to kind of like understand all 10 of the interviews. So I did a ground theory approach of slowly reading the transcripts, listening to the interviews, making memos, comparing those memos, going back to the transcripts, going back to the interviews, and keep tweaking and twerking until I came up with a coding scheme that I feel like represents like what YOC was talking about with healing. And we get into that, and I think in chapter 6 or 7, I think we talk about that. We wrapping up, man. So we talked about the assessment. So just to wrap this up and bring this to a close, we talked for, 3 hours, 4 hours now. So we definitely got to wrap. We got 3 minutes and we out of here. It's over 4 hours. So this is good though, because these is like 4 long chapters. I was thinking I was going to be smooth and slicey and go through them. But the next 3 conversations should be a lot shorter because we're only doing 2 chapters. And we don't got to go through my dissertation story and all the way into like how we got to like a dissertation. So chapter 1 is the problem. Chapter 2 is youth development and healing and merging that and really talking about H.O.L.L.A. and what we're doing. Chapter 3 is our theoretical framework. And chapter 4 is the epistemology, liberation psychology, and what methods we used in this dissertation, particularly critical ethnography and participatory action research. And how did we collect the stories? You know, using maps, using interviews, using focus groups, using small circles, using large community events, and murals. You know, taking notes, debrief circles. So all of these is how we collected the notes and the data and the truths. And then how we analyzed that, we did a participatory analysis, and we had a long process doing that participatory analysis. I did some grounded theory analysis on YOC / the PAR participants who are in the program, on their process in the program and their reflections on being in the program and leading the healing justice movement. So did some thematic analysis also on how at the 18-month mark we talked about hope and spirit. So at the 18-month mark, after we went through all of this 18-month process and building and sustaining and growing the healing justice movement, I asked us, like, what does hope and spirit mean to you in all of those time periods across the last 18 months? And like I said, this dissertation is really theoretically centered at like healing justice and social political development, you know, hope and spirit. So really did some thematic analysis, looking at the transcriptions of everybody's final interview and started making thematic codes on what people were saying about hope and what they were saying about spirit. So there's also a dope chapter, I think that's chapter 7, where we get into just talking about hope and spirit. And those analyses that come from the 18-month interview, at the end of the 18-month process, where I personally did those thematic analysis on the young people's reflections on hope and spirit across our 18-month process. You learned about some of the stuff that they were saying about hope and spirit from that. So that is all 4 chapters. This video is going to be saved. It's long. It's going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel on H.O.L.L.A TV. We're coming back next Wednesday on the 18th, once again from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. And we're going to go into chapters 5 and chapter 6. And chapter 5 is specifically talking about the part work we did and building a grassroots movement. So all of the small circles, the large community events, how we built the curriculum, what we did. So that's chapter 5. That's another thing. The dissertation, each chapter is kind of written like its own little book. So like, even though I got this whole 4 chapters given the theoretical journey, the problem, the ideas in youth development that's important, you know, and the methods that's going to hold all of this together. Each chapter from 5 to 8 are like their own little book. You know, like you can like just go into them on their own because they're not like telling one piece of like one particular story. They're like their own story enough, even though they're all telling a particular story of hope and spirit as a, you know, as a thing really important for community and youth development. So that's chapter 5. And chapter 6, we go into the rituals. So chapter 6 is about grassroots community rituals. Grassroots community rituals. So we're going to talk about building a grassroots movement in chapter 5. And then in chapter 6, we're going to go and talk about what are some grassroots rituals and what reflections we heard from that. So once again, welcome to a long first edition of Dr. Cory Dialogues. Share this video, man. Post this, man. Shit was long. A lot of wisdom in small pockets and other pockets throughout this. And then send feedback, send thoughts, send ideas for the next one. We back on next week, the same time, February 18th. Sorry, February 25th. We're going into chapter 5 and we're going to chapter 6. So share any comments. You can hit us up on Facebook. You could at H.O.L.L.A's link all together. Our website, once again, is hillwithholla.com. Make sure you check out the album, the report back, and the documentary, We Came to Hill, because the dissertation, the documentary, and the album are all like the same story. We just told it in different ways. So if you like listening to music, you can get the story in the music. If you like listening to, or you like watching film and watching a documentary, you can get the story through that. And if you want to like get into like these theoretical, slow ideas and the structure that dissertations fall into, you can like get some of the story through that. And if you want to look across those 3 different tools that we use to keep organizing, to keep healing our community, that'll be even deeper too. Because seeing the overlaps and how certain tools in a dissertation versus the documentary versus the album is able to go into certain discussions or pockets or expressions that one of them couldn't do on its own. So all that to say, thanks again. Make sure you share this. Some people coming on late. Shout out to Blackguard. Share this to the people, man. This is an expression of H.O.L.L.A's link all together dissertation, and like a way to kind of like share some knowledge that be tucked away in manuscripts on pages that we probably never read, to try to make them a little bit more local and fleshed out. So I would love for any feedback on how to do that better, and just what you liked, what you didn't like, and also what wisdom you got. What's your thoughts about just being involved in this conversation more, in whatever way your spirit is telling you to show up a little bit more. So take care, man. Peace. H.O.L.L.A's link all together.